Hello everyone, welcome to episode 27 of our weekly CRICKETher Vodcast. We're delighted to be back here at the Oval where we were a couple of months ago for the London Cup, and this time we're here for the final round of the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy, and we're going to be watching Vipers against the Stars. Now, the situation as it stands is that Vipers are already through to the final, whatever the result of this game. In the North Group, it's possible that Sparks could still qualify for the final, but there would have to be a dramatic turnaround in net run rate. So it looks likely that Diamonds will qualify, but obviously slightly dependent on what happens over the next few hours. And by the time you watch this, we'll all know. So we're not going to speculate further about that, are we, Sid? We're just going to crack on with the week's news. And the biggest thing that we heard this week was the squad announcement for the forthcoming 5 T20s, England against the West Indies. And actually, Sid, we talked about this in last week's podcast. Lisa Kiteley and Heather Knight, for selection purposes, have basically done what we said they were going to do last week, haven't they? So we're mind readers, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a little bit of it's a reasonably conservative squad announcement, and I think what's interesting here is that we're going to see some stuff both from the squad announcement and in terms of the teams that are selected about what kind of coach Lisa Kiteley really is. Is she a coach on the Australian model or on the more traditional English model? And that's interesting. Obviously, she is Australian through and through. But she spent some of her formative years in coaching here. She's worked for about 3 years for the ECB previously, working on the academy. So she's got quite an English mindset, perhaps, about her. What we'll see in the squad selections and in the team selections is how adventurous she is. Because there was one piece of advice that we gave her, and she was obviously watching the podcast, and she took one piece of advice, didn't she, about one particular player, Raf?
She did. Thanks, Lisa Kiteley. She selected Sophia Dunkley, which I obviously, particularly in last week's podcast, was really pushing for. I think it's great for Dunks. She had a bit of a tricky season last year. She got moved from her kind of traditional home in the KSL here at the Oval with the Surrey Stars. She got moved up north. I'm not convinced that Thunder used her particularly brilliantly. She was batting too low down the order, really, to make much of a difference. And then she wasn't selected for any of the England fixtures last summer, despite a really brilliant run of form in the Women's County Championship. So it's been difficult for her. She's not played an international for England since early in 2019, and I think this really could be her opportunity to make a comeback. And it really shouldn't be the case that you make 97 in the opening round of the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy. The second round, I think it was, in fact, and that you aren't an automatic pick for the England side. So I think that, it's great to see her in there. Unfortunately, I am not convinced that she's necessarily going to be playing. If it was up to me, she'd be playing all 5 games, absolutely. Freya Davies would be opening the bowling in all 5 games. But something that Heather Knight said in her Zoom press conference a couple of days ago was essentially that nobody's had any cricket for months. That's obviously true, and everyone's raring to go, and that she feels that they owe a debt of loyalty to the kind of more established players in the team. That's slightly paraphrasing, but I think that I've conveyed the message of what she said, and therefore that does concern me slightly. That therefore, we are going to see still going to be seeing some quite conservative policies there. What do you think the opening 11 is going to be on Monday, Sid?
I suspect it will be very, very similar to the opening 11 for most of the World Cup. If we don't see Lauren Winfield, we might see Lauren Winfield-Hill instead.
Congratulations, Lauren and Courtney.
Yes. No, I think that that is the interesting question. Again, it comes back to is Lisa Kiteley that English coach or that Australian one even, sorry. Does she go with the more adventurous selection, go with the younger player, and pick Dunkley out front, or does she go safety first, pick Lauren Winfield to give the batting, that bit more depth of security and things? Because Dunkley is definitely a little bit more of a gamble. You can see them thinking.
Yeah, but I think that if you're not going to take a gamble now, then when are you going to take a gamble? There's not really a huge amount at stake. Anyway, we talked about this last week, so let's not rehash that.
Okay. Right, so that's the England squad. We've also had some interesting news about the 100 this week, haven't we, Raf? What's the deal with that? What's the announcement we've had about the 100?
Yeah, well, we've been waiting for this for a while. Essentially, the news is that it's great news for the women. Is that they are not going to be taking a pay cut. The men, we heard a few months ago, are going to be taking a 20% pay cut because of the ECB's general cutbacks, but the women are going to be paid the same. And the other kind of bit of news that goes alongside that is that the contracts, anyone who signed a contract to play in this year's 100, it will automatically roll over for next year, and players will be able to choose to keep that contract, or alternatively they'll be able to choose to go elsewhere if they want to. So it's a kind of very potent display of some player power there going on. So over the next few weeks, players will decide whether they want to carry on for the same team, or perhaps they might feel that they've made a better case for themselves in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy. They might want to try and bargain up to a different side. They'll be able to do that as well. And then as of October, we'll see the teams who have not had some of their players roll over will then be able to look around and look at the market, and it really does seem to be a kind of a market for the players, so that's great, and that's obviously been negotiated with the PCA over the last few weeks. In terms of the pay and the pay remaining the same, I think that was always going to be what the ECB were going to do. I think that the reason that they didn't announce it a few months ago is because they were kind of working out what was going to happen with rolling over the contracts, and they were trying to work out what was fairest for that. But in terms of the pay, really, it would have been a bit of a given the huge disparities in pay that already existed, it probably would have been a little bit difficult to reduce the player pay without the 100 being a much less attractive option, probably for some of the overseas players, especially who are on those top end contracts that's still worth a lot less than the bottom end men's contracts. But we should give credit to the ECB for that decision, because it is absolutely the right one. They're looking after the interests of the players' welfare, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and I think it's an interesting example of what happens if you have a powerful union involved. Not to go all Arthur Scargill on you guys, but if you have a powerful union involved, it can negotiate on behalf of the players and put the players in a strong position. It's put them in the driving seat. It's gone, you can keep your existing contract. If you want a worry-free winter, you can just go, well, I'm going to roll over my existing contract, but if you think you can do better, then go out there and do better. Go and find a different team to play for. So player power.
Okay. There was another interesting announcement this week, which relates to stuff that's happening over in Australia with their forthcoming series against New Zealand, the Rose Bowl series. That's going to be happening over the next few weeks, so we're going to have loads of international cricket happening all at once. And that is that the Australian government have said that there's going to be crowds let into these games. There's obviously going to be limited numbers, but I understand that some of the matches have already sold out, so that's brilliant. When I heard that, it did kind of make me think about the fact that we, in this country, a few weeks ago, it was being talked about that fans might be let in as a kind of experiment to some of these forthcoming England v West Indies games, and that we might see crowds, but actually they are still going to be behind closed doors. So there's an interesting contrast there, isn't there, Sid?
Yeah, it has been. It's interesting times, isn't it? As the old proverb allegedly says, "May you live in interesting times." I think that it's indicative of the way that coronavirus is being handled differently, in Australia in particular and in New Zealand, to the way it's been handled over here. And it's been interesting looking on Twitter sometimes, and you see, the Australians sometimes are complaining about the way that their government has approached the handling of coronavirus. Well, want to swap? But let's just try and stick with the positives. I think that we've still got some games being played next week. We're not going to have the crowds in, but it's still very exciting to be having those games, and they're going to be on telly. And some other really great news, of course, is that Sky have agreed to show them on YouTube as well. So you don't need any kind of Sky subscription to be able to view them. You can just switch on your computer, go to YouTube, and watch totally for free. So that's fantastic news as well.
Brilliant stuff. So in a week's time, we're going to be at the final of the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy, which will feature Vipers and one other team.
Other, captained by Miss A and Other.
So we're really looking forward to that. We're looking forward to the England games. There's going to be loads happening. So keep following CRICKETher, keep following us, and we'll see you in a week's time.